Evelyn Hart came to Jonathan Cross's charity gala prepared to confess that she had betrayed him, but the secret Daniel Mercer did not know was that her confession had been built to expose him instead. 600 guests filled the grand ballroom of the Cross Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago, speaking beneath crystal chandeliers while a January wind pressed against 40-foot windows overlooking the frozen river. The room glittered with old money, political ambition, and carefully rehearsed generosity. Television cameras waited near the stage while reporters stood behind velvet ropes. Every guest expected Jonathan Cross to announce another record year for the company he had controlled for nearly 3 decades. Only Evelyn knew the evening might end with that control taken from him. She stood 10 feet from the stage in a black evening dress Daniel had selected, holding a glass of sparkling water she had not touched. Her phone rested inside her clutch with the message that had governed every decision she made since the previous night. Daniel claimed he possessed records connecting her younger brother, Ryan, to a fraudulent billing review at the private ambulance service where he worked in Cleveland. The records were false, but they could still trigger a suspension, a licensing inquiry, and months of public suspicion. Ryan had spent 9 years helping strangers through their worst nights. One accusation could take away his career and his reputation. Daniel promised the complaint would disappear if Evelyn followed his script exactly. At 9:10 in the evening, Jonathan would invite her onto the stage. She would admit that she had copied confidential files from Cross Holdings. She would accuse Jonathan of ordering her to conceal millions of dollars in improper payments. She would resign in front of the cameras. Daniel would use the scandal to trigger an emergency clause in the Cross Family Voting Trust. Thomas Reed, the longtime attorney for both Jonathan and the trust, would certify that Jonathan's conflict required temporary suspension. 3 board members would support an interim committee. Daniel would gain practical control without placing his name on the first page of the betrayal. That was his plan. What Daniel did not know was that Evelyn had stopped believing him 72 hours earlier. He stood beside her now in a midnight blue tuxedo, greeting donors by name and remembering details about their children, charities, and private ambitions. Anyone watching would have seen a trusted executive supporting a nervous colleague. Evelyn felt his hand settle lightly against her elbow. It looked reassuring. It was a reminder. "You know what happens if you change one word," he said without turning toward her. His smile remained fixed on an Illinois state senator approaching from across the ballroom. "Ryan loses everything before breakfast." Evelyn looked toward Jonathan at the center of the room. At 48, he carried power without needing to display it. He wore a simple black tuxedo and revealed nothing as he shook hands and accepted praise. 6 months earlier, Evelyn had believed Jonathan was the most dangerous man she had ever met. 3 days earlier, she learned Daniel was more dangerous because he had convinced her to feel safe. "You chose the dress," Evelyn said quietly. "You wrote the confession. You decided where I would stand. Is there anything tonight that belongs to me?" Daniel finally looked at her. His expression was almost kind. That kindness had once made her trust him. Now it made her stomach tighten. "The future belongs to you," he said. "After tonight." The orchestra stopped. Conversations faded as Jonathan stepped onto the stage. A white screen behind him displayed the Cross Foundation logo above photographs of families receiving housing assistance. He thanked the guests and spoke about responsibility, legacy, and the obligation powerful institutions owed to ordinary people. Evelyn almost laughed. Jonathan had signed agreements that protected his company from families who could not afford long legal fights. He had approved the decision that kept evidence connected to her father's death from reaching her family. He was not innocent. That was what made Daniel's lies so effective. Daniel built them around truths Jonathan had already given the world reason to believe. At 9:09 in the evening, Evelyn's phone vibrated. A photograph appeared on the screen. Ryan stood outside his apartment building in Cleveland, speaking to 2 compliance investigators from his employer beside an unmarked sedan. Beneath the image was a message from Daniel. "Do your part, and the review ends tonight." Evelyn's chest tightened. For months, Daniel had trained her to answer fear by looking at him for direction. This time, she forced herself to look elsewhere. Jonathan had stopped speaking. His eyes found hers across the ballroom. He placed one hand against the podium, then removed it. No one else would have recognized the signal. The verified files were ready. The secure connection was open. The choice belonged to her. There is one person I need to recognize before we continue, Jonathan said. Miss Evelyn Hart, would you join me? Applause moved through the ballroom. Daniel stepped back, allowing her to pass. He believed she was walking toward Jonathan's destruction. Evelyn crossed the marble floor while hundreds of guests watched. She could still follow Daniel's script and protect Ryan for one night. But Ryan had once told her that fear did not remove responsibility. It only revealed how much responsibility cost. Jonathan offered her the microphone. His face remained unreadable, but she saw exhaustion behind his eyes. He knew she might betray him. More importantly, he knew he had given her reasons to do it. Evelyn faced the crowd. I betrayed Jonathan Cross, she said. The room became completely still. Daniel lowered his chin. That was the first line he had written for her. Evelyn continued. I copied confidential records from Cross Holdings. I met with people who wanted this company weakened. I believed a man who told me he was trying to protect me. Tonight, I agreed to help him take control of this company. Daniel's smile disappeared. Evelyn turned toward the screen. But I did not come here to finish his plan. The foundation logo vanished. Security footage appeared from a private dining room at a hotel 12 miles north of downtown Chicago. Daniel sat with 3 members of the Cross Holdings board, promising them contracts, authority, and executive positions once Jonathan lost voting control. Phones rose across the room. This recording is incomplete, Daniel called. She manipulated it. Evelyn faced him from the stage. You were right about one thing. Jonathan Cross built his power on secrets. A second file appeared, showing financial transfers, meeting schedules, and private messages bearing Daniel's authorization. You only made the mistake of believing every secret belonged to you. The ballroom lights went dark. Emergency floor lighting came on, elevators stopped at designated levels, and staff-controlled doors shifted into security mode while marked emergency exits remained open. 15 seconds later, the main lights returned. Daniel was gone. On the company control display behind the stage, Jonathan's control status had changed to pending suspension, and an interim voting committee appeared as the designated successor awaiting trustee approval. 72 hours earlier, Evelyn learned that Daniel had built his entire plan around one assumption. When fear finally cornered her, she would choose the person who sounded kindest. She was alone in her office on the 38th floor of Cross Tower when he entered without knocking and closed the door behind him. Chicago looked cold and colorless beneath a late afternoon sky, with traffic moving toward Lakeshore Drive nearly half a mile below. 3 financial reports lay open across her desk beside a sealed envelope delivered less than 20 minutes earlier. Daniel noticed the envelope immediately. He noticed everything. Jonathan knows, he said. He did not remove his coat or sit down. His urgency felt carefully measured, as though he had practiced exactly how much fear to show. Knows what? Evelyn asked. About the copied files. About the meetings. About Claire Bennett. He has been watching you for weeks. 6 months earlier, those words would have sent Evelyn into panic. 3 weeks earlier, she would have believed Daniel without question. Now she watched the way he stood between her and the door, the way his eyes moved toward the envelope, and the way he offered certainty before she had asked for proof. How did he find out? That does not matter. It matters to me. Daniel glanced toward the hallway. We have 72 hours before the Cross Foundation Gala. Jonathan plans to announce an internal investigation. Your name will be attached to every unauthorized transfer. By Monday morning, the company, your bank, and federal investigators could all be asking questions you cannot answer. Evelyn let the silence stretch. Daniel had always filled silence for her. Whenever she became uncertain, he supplied an answer. Whenever she became afraid, he gave the fear a name. Whenever she needed time, he created a deadline. What do you want me to do? She asked. His shoulders relaxed slightly. He believed the familiar pattern had returned. We finish what we started. You make a public statement at the gala. You explain that Jonathan ordered you to move the money and conceal the payments. 3 board members will demand an emergency review. Once Jonathan loses voting control, we release the records to the authorities. And then you are protected. Ryan is protected. You leave Chicago with enough money to start over. Evelyn studied his face. He looked sincere because sincerity was one of his most useful tools. How much money? $2 million. From where? A legal defense fund established by members of the board. That sounds generous. It is practical. He placed both hands on the edge of her desk. You are the only person who can prove what Jonathan has done. That sentence would once have made her feel important. Now it sounded like a description of a disposable witness. Evelyn touched the sealed envelope. Inside was a printed message from Claire Bennett. Claire had reviewed the records Daniel provided and found that several transaction dates and approval chains had been altered. The account numbers were real. The payments were real. The companies receiving the money were real. Daniel had not invented a false empire. He had taken a guilty one and rewritten the chain of command. I need time, Evelyn said. We do not have time. Then give me 1 hour. Daniel watched her. Do not call anyone. Who would I call? That is exactly what Jonathan wants you to wonder. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt. I will return at 6. At the door, Evelyn stopped him. If Jonathan already knows, why am I still inside the building? Daniel paused. For the first time, his answer did not arrive immediately. Because he wants to see who you lead him to. Then he left. Evelyn opened the envelope. Claire's message contained an address, a time, and 1 sentence. Daniel Mercer is telling the truth about Jonathan Cross, but he is lying about why. The address belonged to a quiet restaurant in River North, less than 1 mile from Cross Tower. Evelyn entered through the service hallway at 5:15, wearing a dark wool coat and carrying no company devices. Claire waited in a private room with a paper folder and 2 untouched cups of coffee. She looked tired, direct, and unimpressed by expensive surroundings. You came alone, Claire said. That was the condition. Daniel taught you to follow conditions. Daniel taught me to question Jonathan. Claire pushed the folder across the table. He was right to do that. Inside were settlement agreements, property records, and internal memoranda dating back more than a decade. Evelyn recognized the manufacturing company connected to her father's death. Jonathan had not owned the factory when the accident occurred, but his acquisition team later discovered that management had ignored incomplete safety reports. Instead of reopening the matter, Jonathan approved the preservation of existing settlements and confidentiality agreements. Evelyn felt the old anger rise. So Daniel was right. About Jonathan's history, yes. About himself, no. Claire opened another file. It showed Daniel meeting privately with 3 board members at a hotel 12 miles north of downtown Chicago. The meetings began before Evelyn joined the company. He did not recruit you because you discovered corruption, Claire said. He arranged for you to discover the part he wanted you to see. Why me? Your father. Your access. Your anger. He needed someone the public would believe. Evelyn closed the folder. Jonathan did not underestimate me. No. He hired you because he knew Daniel would approach you. The words changed the room. Every choice Evelyn had made now seemed to sit inside plans designed by 2 men who believed they understood her better than she understood herself. At 5:52, her phone rang. Jonathan was calling from the top floor. Come to my office, he said. Daniel will return to yours in 8 minutes. How do you know that? Building records show the same pattern every time he pressures you. He leaves, gives you 1 hour, then returns before the hour ends. Evelyn looked at Claire. What happens if I refuse? Jonathan was silent for a moment. Then Mercer wins before either of us learns whether you were ever truly on his side. Evelyn ended the call and stood. She no longer believed Daniel was protecting her. She did not believe Jonathan deserved protection either. For the first time since entering Cross Holdings, she understood that choosing between them was the trap. She had 72 hours to build a third option, and neither man could know it existed. Evelyn reached the 46th floor with less than 3 minutes remaining, carrying Claire's folder beneath her coat and one dangerous conclusion in her mind. Daniel had not lied about Jonathan being guilty, but he had lied about which wrongdoing belonged to whom. Jonathan's office occupied the eastern corner of Cross Tower, surrounded by glass walls that made Chicago appear small enough to purchase. The river below reflected the gray evening sky, and traffic moved along Wacker Drive in narrow lines of white and red. Jonathan stood beside a conference table covered with bank records, legal agreements, and photographs of Daniel meeting members of the board. He did not welcome Evelyn or offer her a seat. Did Claire show you the altered approval chains? He asked. She showed me enough to know Daniel is building a case out of real transactions. That is how Mercer works. A complete lie invites investigation. A partial truth invites belief. You sound almost impressed. I survive by respecting what dangerous people do well. Evelyn placed the folder on the table but kept one hand over it. You helped bury information after my father died. Jonathan looked at her. Yes. The answer came without hesitation, and its simplicity made her anger sharper. She had expected denial, legal language, or an explanation designed to reduce responsibility. Instead, he gave her one word and forced her to carry its full weight. My mother spent years believing there was nothing more to learn. There was more, and you made sure she never found it. I approved a legal recommendation that protected a company Cross Holdings was preparing to acquire. My attorneys argued that reopening every settlement would destroy the purchase and cost nearly 800 jobs. So you priced the truth against a payroll. I made a decision that benefited the company. You mean it benefited you? Jonathan's expression did not change. Those two things were not separate to me then. Evelyn understood why Daniel's story had reached her so easily. Jonathan did not hide behind innocence. He admitted enough to make every accusation against him feel possible. Daniel says you ordered the hidden payments. Some of them, yes. Jonathan slid a report across the table. The settlement fund in Indiana. The political consulting payment in Springfield. The property acquisition outside Milwaukee. The listed payments totaled more than $14 million. And the others? Evelyn asked. Mercer approved them through inactive subsidiaries, then altered the records to make them appear older and authorized by my office. Why use companies you already control? Because a false trail is strongest when it follows a real road. Evelyn looked at the photographs. He met with the board before I joined Cross Holdings. 18 months before. Then why did you hire me? Jonathan walked toward the windows. For the first time, he seemed reluctant to answer. Because Daniel mentioned your name 2 weeks before your interview. He said an internal auditor from Ohio had been asking precise questions about a company we acquired years ago. He recommended bringing you inside, where your investigation could be controlled. And you agreed. I wanted to know why he had chosen you. You used me as bait. Jonathan faced her. Yes. The second admission landed harder than the first. Evelyn had entered Cross Tower believing her persistence had earned Jonathan's attention. Daniel encouraged that belief. Jonathan allowed it. Between them, ambition and grief had been converted into tools. Did anything about my work matter? She asked. Your work exposed 3 failures my senior executives missed. That was not my question. Your work mattered. My reason for hiring you was still dishonest. Evelyn turned away. She had spent 6 months trying to prove she belonged in a world that selected her for reasons unrelated to talent. Daniel treated her like a partner. Jonathan treated her like a test. Neither man considered what would happen when the test learned to read them both. Her phone vibrated at 6. Daniel's name appeared. Jonathan glanced at it. Answer. You do not give me orders anymore. Then consider it advice from the man whose office he assumes you have never entered. Evelyn accepted the call. Where are you? Daniel asked. In the parking garage. You left the building? You told me not to call anyone. You did not tell me I could not drive. A pause followed. Come back upstairs. I need to show you something. I need space to think. Thinking is what Jonathan wants while he prepares the story that sends you to prison. Then give me a reason to trust your story. Daniel lowered his voice. Your brother's name is already inside a draft referral connected to fraudulent medical billing. I can stop it tonight. Jonathan cannot. Send me proof. Proof creates a record. So does fear. Another silence. Daniel expected obedience. Questions made him cautious because questions created choices, and his control depended on making her believe she had none. You have until 8, he said. After that, I stopped protecting Ryan. The call ended. Jonathan opened a second folder. Inside were photographs of Ryan leaving work, entering his apartment building, and eating at a diner near the ambulance depot. Daniel's private investigators submitted these expenses through one of our security vendors, Jonathan said. He has watched Ryan for at least 4 months. He placed a digital recorder beside the photographs. Daniel's recorded voice discussed how ordinary billing records could be rearranged to suggest that Ryan approved transports he had never authorized. No direct threat appeared. Daniel spoke as though he were solving a business problem. You had this recording, Evelyn said. Why did you not warn me? Because I needed Daniel to believe his plan was working. And what did Ryan need? Jonathan did not answer. Evelyn closed her hand around the recorder. You keep calling people assets, then act surprised when they stop behaving like property. Jonathan looked toward the city. What do you propose? I give Daniel enough cooperation to keep him moving. Claire verifies the evidence. Your forensic team prepares a controlled copy of the archive that can identify which recipient opens which file. You prepare evidence against Daniel, including evidence that damages you. That last condition is not negotiable. It is the only condition. And when Daniel asks you to accuse me publicly, I will. Jonathan turned slowly. You expect me to permit that? You hired me as bait. Now you can learn what it feels like to trust the person holding the line. Evelyn gathered the photographs, recorder, and altered reports. She entered the office with two versions of the company competing for her belief. She left knowing both versions were true. Jonathan built his power by hiding consequences. Daniel intended to steal that power by manufacturing new ones. Evelyn would let each man believe she had chosen him until both discovered that she had chosen the evidence instead. By 8 that evening, Daniel gave Evelyn a test designed to prove whether fear still controlled her, and the test came with a deadline at midnight. He met her in a private conference room on the 39th floor of Cross Tower. A black leather case rested on the table between them. Daniel did not ask where she had been. He studied her expression, searching for evidence that someone else had reached her first. You wanted proof, he said. He opened the case and removed a laptop that had never been connected to the company network. On the screen was a draft compliance report naming Ryan as a participant in a billing scheme involving emergency medical transports. It included his employee number, home address, work schedule, and 3 dates when he had signed routine patient records. The dates had been rearranged to suggest a pattern that did not exist. This would not survive a serious investigation, Evelyn said. It does not need to survive, Daniel replied. It only needs to begin. You called this protection. I am protecting him from what Jonathan is prepared to release. You created the report. Daniel lowered the screen. I created leverage. Jonathan created the world where leverage is necessary. His voice remained calm, almost patient. You can still make this disappear. He removed a portable drive from the case. There is a restricted archive on the 42nd floor. It contains contracts, settlement records, and board communications Jonathan plans to hide before the gala. I need a complete copy before midnight. My access does not include that archive. Daniel placed a white security card beside the drive. It will tonight. Thomas Reed approved a temporary legal review under your name. Evelyn recognized the signature. Thomas served as Jonathan's attorney for more than 20 years and helped preserve the agreement connected to her father's death. Until that moment, she assumed his loyalty to Jonathan was absolute. Why would Thomas help you? Because loyalty becomes expensive when an empire begins to fall. Daniel pushed the card toward her. Bring the drive to the lower parking level beneath the old Lakeshore Federal Building at midnight. Come alone. And Ryan's name? Gone by morning. I want every copy of the report removed. Complete the transfer first. Daniel stood. Do not make me remind you how quickly a reputation can collapse. After he left, Evelyn removed the recorder Jonathan had given her. Daniel had never directly threatened Ryan. He spoke in conditional promises, professional consequences, and carefully arranged possibilities. Fear sounded more believable when it arrived in legal language. At 9:15, Evelyn entered the restricted archive using Thomas's authorization. The room was windowless and cooled to 64 degrees. Jonathan's forensic team had prepared a mirrored collection of selected records that Claire and independent counsel had already verified as authentic. Each copy carried an identifying marker that would show which recipient opened or forwarded it without altering the contents. Evelyn copied the collection to Daniel's drive, along with the genuine records exposing Jonathan's decisions. She had no intention of protecting him from the truth. At 10:40, the transfer finished. Thomas waited outside the archive in a gray overcoat, carrying an umbrella although the forecast called for snow. You should not be here, Evelyn said. Neither should you. You authorized my access. I authorized Daniel's request. Your presence was convenient. How long have you been working with him? Working with is an imprecise phrase. Then give me a precise one. Thomas lowered his voice. Jonathan built Cross Holdings through agreements that required silence. Daniel wants to inherit the company by turning those agreements into weapons. I want the agreements protected, even the ones that concealed what happened to my father, especially those. Once one family reopens a settlement, hundreds may follow. The claims could exceed $300 million. Evelyn felt the same pressure that had reduced her father's life to a number on a balance sheet. You are not loyal to Jonathan. I am loyal to continuity. That is what people say when they want a system to outlive their conscience. Thomas remained calm. Daniel knows you met Claire. He also knows you visited Jonathan's office. You told him. I confirmed what he suspected. Why warn me? Because Daniel is preparing to remove anyone who can challenge his version of events, and Jonathan is preparing to expose everyone who assisted him. You are standing between two collapsing structures, and you expect me to protect you. I expect you to understand that evidence matters only when someone powerful agrees to recognize it. Evelyn placed the drive inside her coat. That belief is why people like you eventually lose control of the truth. At 11:53, she reached the parking level beneath the abandoned federal building near Lake Michigan. Daniel waited beside a dark sedan. Evelyn handed him the drive. Did anyone see you? He asked. Only Thomas. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What did he say? That loyalty becomes expensive. Daniel smiled. Thomas always mistakes caution for wisdom. Now remove Ryan's name. Daniel showed her a message from the compliance consultant confirming that the false review had been paused and its draft referral withdrawn. There are no guarantees after tonight, he said. Then this is not finished. No. It begins at the gala. He explained the confession she would deliver and the emergency trust clause Thomas would certify. You will not hesitate, and you will not change one word. And if I refuse? Daniel turned his phone toward her. A live image showed Ryan leaving the ambulance depot after his shift, unaware that a camera watched from across the street. Then your brother learns how much your conscience costs him. Evelyn kept watching until Daniel lowered the phone. She entered the garage expecting one traitor. She left knowing the company had been held together by 3 forms of betrayal. Jonathan hid the past, Daniel manufactured the future, and Thomas protected whichever silence preserved his power. During the next 2 days, Claire verified the marked records with independent counsel. Jonathan's security team documented the voting trust manipulation, and Ryan quietly arranged to meet his employer's general counsel if the false report resurfaced. Evelyn told none of them everything. The plan depended on Daniel believing fear still controlled her. By the morning of the gala, Evelyn understood that exposing him would not be enough. She would have to expose the system that taught all 3 men to believe truth belonged to whoever controlled the room. When the lights returned inside the grand ballroom, Evelyn understood that Daniel had not escaped the trap. He had activated the final part of it. The hotel's elevators remained stopped at designated floors, staff access doors were in security mode, and event managers asked guests to stay in the ballroom while technicians checked the system. Marked emergency exits remained available, but opening them would trigger alarms and place anyone leaving directly in view of security cameras. Hundreds of guests stared at their phones as an emergency notice moved through financial news feeds. Daniel had activated a temporary control provision in the cross-family voting trust. Thomas certified that Jonathan faced an immediate conflict severe enough to suspend his authority, and 3 independent board members supported the certification. The filing did not transfer ownership of Jonathan's shares, but once accepted by the trustee, it would place their voting power in the hands of an interim committee until a court reviewed the certification. Jonathan stood beside Evelyn, studying the control display behind the stage. He needed the public accusation to support the emergency certification, he said quietly. Then we stopped looking at the accusation, Evelyn replied. Reporters called questions from behind the barrier. The 3 board members shown in the recording were already moving towards separate exits, each pretending not to know the others. Thomas stood near a side door, holding his phone and watching the room with the expression of a man waiting for 2 enemies to destroy each other. Evelyn returned to the microphone before event staff could take it. The security interruption is being used to complete a change in voting control, she said. The records now appearing online were released by Daniel Mercer. The emergency certification was approved by Thomas Reed. Thomas stopped moving. Jonathan turned toward her. Their plan had focused on Daniel. Evelyn had decided that exposing one man would leave the structure intact. Miss Hart, Thomas called from the floor. You are making statements based on incomplete information. Then you should welcome the complete record. Evelyn touched the control beside the podium. The backup presentation system displayed settlement agreements, hidden corporate payments, altered approval dates, and the marked archive Daniel had taken from her. Each verified copy carried a unique forensic identifier. The access report showed the collection moving from Daniel's private laptop to Thomas's legal office, and then to the 3 board members who supported the emergency committee. It also showed that one portion had been reviewed on Jonathan's executive server. A murmur moved through the room. Jonathan looked at the screen. You tracked my review as well. I tracked everyone. Those records include protected communications. They include the truth about my father. Evelyn opened the oldest memorandum. The factory's former management had known that safety reports were incomplete. Jonathan did not own the factory when the accident occurred, but his acquisition team discovered the problem during negotiations. Thomas recommended preserving the family settlements instead of reopening the investigation. Jonathan approved the recommendation. Daniel told me Jonathan created every wrong recorded in these files, Evelyn said. That was a lie. Jonathan did not create all of them. He decided which truths were too expensive to reveal. Jonathan did not interrupt. Daniel altered records to seize control. Thomas protected agreements that should have been challenged years ago. 3 board members accepted authority in exchange for silence. Jonathan built the system that made all of it possible. I helped Daniel enter that system because I wanted his version of the truth to be complete. Her admission changed the room more than any accusation. Daniel's power depended on Evelyn protecting her reputation. By admitting her role, she removed the threat he used against her. A message appeared on her phone from Claire. The verified archive had reached independent counsel, the Illinois Attorney General's office, and investigators already waiting outside the hotel under a sealed preservation order. Ryan was safe in Cleveland. His employer's general counsel had compared the supposed billing evidence with original dispatch records and confirmed that the dates had been manipulated. The internal review had been halted. Jonathan leaned closer. The trustee accepts the emergency certification at 9:15 unless Thomas withdraws it. Evelyn looked at the ballroom clock. 9:11. Thomas, you have 4 minutes to withdraw your certification. Thomas remained near the door. That could expose Cross Holdings to claims exceeding $300 million. Those claims belong to people your agreements forced into silence. Thousands of employees could lose their jobs. Jonathan stepped forward. For years, he had used the same argument to defend every compromise. Evelyn waited to see whether he would use it again. Withdraw the certification, Jonathan said. Thomas stared at him. You will lose the company. I already lost it when I allowed you to decide which consequences other people were permitted to know. Thomas looked toward the board members, but none met his eyes. At 9:13, he opened the trustee portal, entered his credentials, and withdrew his certification. The display behind the stage changed again. The interim voting committee was suspended pending judicial review. Hotel staff restored normal access, and investigators entered through the main lobby with the event's security director. Guests began moving toward the exits, but many remained. Daniel appeared on the upper balcony outside the control room. He was not running. He stood with one hand on the railing, composed and distant, as though he still believed he could explain the evening into a different shape. Evelyn, he called, you think this makes you free? No. Telling the truth does not erase what I did. Jonathan will sacrifice you when the cameras are gone. Maybe. Then why protect him? Evelyn looked up. I am not protecting him. That is what you never understood. Daniel's expression changed. He built every decision around the belief that she needed one powerful man to rescue her from another. Without that choice, his design became meaningless. Investigators approached the balcony. Daniel looked toward Thomas and the board members, but the loyalty he purchased had already disappeared. Evelyn turned to Jonathan. The complete verified archive has been released. Not only Daniel's files. Everything. Jonathan nodded once. My attorneys will argue that you violated the law. They will be right. You may lose your career. I know. And you still released it. Evelyn looked across the ballroom at the donors, employees, reporters, and families whose names had once been reduced to numbers inside sealed agreements. For 6 months, every man in this company told me what the truth would cost. None of you asked who had already paid for the lie. Outside, snow began falling over Michigan Avenue. Inside, Jonathan's company remained standing in name only. Daniel failed to inherit it. Thomas failed to preserve it. Jonathan finally stopped defending it. Evelyn had not escaped consequences, but she had taken away their power to define those consequences for her. 2 years after the gala, Evelyn sat across from Jonathan in a monitored conference room at a federal correctional facility in northern Illinois and realized that losing an empire had made him look smaller, but not simpler. The room was bright and plain. Jonathan wore the standard facility uniform. From habit, he glanced once at the bare wrist where his silver watch had been for most of his adult life. "You still check the time," Evelyn said. "Some habits survive their purpose," he replied. A case manager had placed an approved folder on the table before Evelyn entered. It contained statements from former employees, contractors, and families whose settlements had been hidden behind confidentiality agreements. Some had received compensation through the court-supervised restructuring. Others were still waiting. A federal appeals court denied the company's last request to keep the remaining records sealed, Evelyn said. The archive can now be released. Jonathan looked at the folder. Then Cross Holdings is finished. The name is still on 3 hotels and a shipping terminal. A name is not an empire. In the months after the gala, investigators separated Daniel's fabricated transfers from Jonathan's real misconduct. Daniel pleaded guilty to conspiracy, fraud, witness intimidation, and falsifying corporate records. Thomas lost his law license and admitted that he approved false trust documents to preserve the settlement system he had built. 3 board members entered plea agreements. Jonathan pleaded guilty to obstruction, false reporting, and concealing material evidence. Cross Holdings entered court-supervised restructuring, and Cross Tower sold for $83 million less than its valuation before the scandal. Evelyn did not escape judgment. She admitted copying restricted files and assisting Daniel before she understood the full plan. Her professional license was suspended for 18 months. She paid a $65,000 civil penalty, completed 600 hours of community service, and accepted restrictions on the financial work she could perform. Reporters called her a whistleblower. Prosecutors called her a cooperating witness. Former executives called her a traitor. None of those descriptions felt complete. "How is Ryan?" Jonathan asked. "Back on full duty. He bought a 1,400-square-foot house outside Cleveland with a small yard. Does he forgive you?" "He forgave me before I forgave myself." Jonathan nodded, but Evelyn no longer cared whether powerful men understood the damage around them. Understanding had too often become their substitute for repair. "Daniel sent me a letter," Jonathan said. "He asked whether I thought he ever loved you." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing." The question was not mine to answer. 2 years earlier, Jonathan would have answered because he believed every question inside his world belonged to him. "I think Daniel believed he loved me," Evelyn said. "But he loved controlling me more. The moment I became someone he could not predict, whatever he called love became punishment." "And what did you believe you felt for him?" "Relief. He appeared when I was angry, confused, and alone. He named my enemies for me. I mistook certainty for safety." Jonathan lowered his eyes. "People often do. People inside your company had to. You build a place where everyone needed protection from someone." A guard announced that the meeting would end in 10 minutes. Jonathan looked at the folder. "What will you do with the statements?" "Claire and I are building a public archive. Every document will include context, independent verification, and responses from the people named. There will be lawsuits. Then we will begin with the records we can prove." Jonathan leaned back. "You sound less certain than you did at the gala." "I am less certain." Certainty was Daniel's favorite weapon. Evelyn opened the folder to the original memorandum connected to her father's case. Jonathan's signature appeared at the bottom. "My mother read this last month. She spent 20 years believing no one knew enough to help us. Learning that people knew and chose silence was worse." Jonathan did not touch the page. "I am sorry. I believe you." He looked surprised. Regret does not erase the decision. That is the difference between remorse and repair. The guard announced 5 minutes remaining. "Why bring this to me?" Jonathan asked. "Because the archive can include your sworn account, if you authorize its release. Your deposition, internal correspondence, and personal notes would explain how the settlement system worked. You want me to help dismantle what remains. I want you to tell the truth without negotiating what it buys you." Jonathan remained silent. The case manager entered with a facility-approved pen and a consent form that his attorney had reviewed in advance. Jonathan read the first page, then signed. His signature was slower than it had been on the documents that created the silence, but it was clear. "This does not make us even," he said. "There is no even." He stood when the guard approached. Do you regret entering Cross Tower? Evelyn considered the question. She lost money, status, certainty, and the career she once believed would define her. She also learned that accepting responsibility did not require surrendering her identity to shame. I regret who paid for the lessons, she said. I do not regret learning them. Outside, the February air was 27 degrees, and snow covered the parking lot. Evelyn walked to an 8-year-old sedan with nearly 90,000 miles on the odometer. The life waiting for her was smaller than the one Daniel promised, and less impressive than the one Jonathan offered. It was also entirely hers. On the passenger seat lay a blue notebook filled with names, dates, unpaid claims, and stories no settlement could reduce to a number. Before starting the car, Evelyn opened the notebook and wrote one final sentence beneath Jonathan's name. She had once believed the greatest danger was trusting the wrong man. Now she understood that the deeper danger was allowing any man, any company, or any empire to decide who she had to become in order to survive.